This House or, for that matter, within the media. Call on Government Order of the Day, number 1.
New Zealand International Convention Centre Bill, third reading.
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I move that the New Zealand International Convention Centre Bill be now read a third time. Mr Speaker, the third reading of this bill brings to an end the long and involved process to set up and establish an international standard convention centre in New Zealand. We've long needed such a centre. There has been discussion about it, particularly in Auckland, for over 20 years. We will now be getting one thanks to the persistence of this government and thanks to this bill. This is a bill that will provide jobs and better incomes for New Zealanders. There will be around 1,000 people employed in the construction process, not 18 as the opposition are prone to assert. There will be 800 people servicing the needs of delegates and exhibitors when the centre is fully established. The centre will generate economic growth for all New Zealanders. It will inject an estimated $90 million in additional spending by delegates in Auckland and elsewhere in New Zealand and increase GDP by $49 million as a result. It will also enhance New Zealand's reputation as a developed country destination. It will enable the construction of an international standard convention centre, seating up to 3,500 delegates. We simply don't have a facility of that size and that standard. It will be a new $402 million asset that will consolidate Auckland's standing as an international metropolitan city and destination of significance, something that Aucklanders have been keen to achieve for many years. And this will be achieved with very little, if any, investment by New Zealand taxpayers. This is another initiative of the government's business growth agenda, a comprehensive program of work to build jobs and growth for New Zealanders. Members opposite will have had their credibility tested in opposing this legislation. Sky City will be allowed an additional 230 pokie machines. This is an interesting number. 230 is the same number granted to Sky City under the previous government in 2001 for the development of the existing and much smaller Auckland Convention Centre. In fact, in return for the deal of the same number of increased pokie machines, they ended up with a convention centre 1/4 of the size of this one. It was welcomed by Helen Clark and Mark Burton at the time. They praised it for helping bring tourists to New Zealand. Then they used to know about the benefits of convention centres. What's more, under the 9 years during which the Labour Party was in power, the number of pokie machines around New Zealand increased by an average of 707 per year. That is, increased by 707 per year. In the last 5 years, the number of pokie machines is falling, not increasing, by around 500 per year. So, under the previous government, who were criticising pokie machines, the numbers went up 700 per year with the support of the Green Party for a 700 per year increase in pokie machines. Now that they are safely out of government, the number of pokies is falling by 500 per year, so I invite them to speak and explain that policy to the House. Where were the Greens in 2001? Were they building fake casinos in Aotea Square then? No, they weren't. Were they pulling stunts outside Parliament when pokies were going up at 700 machines per year? No. But once pokie numbers started dropping by 500 a year, then they decided they were against them, and moreover against the government under which the number of pokey machines is dropping by 500 per year. They were then absolutely as quiet as church mouse. There is a claim that the bill was constitutionally dubious, that it breached principles of equality before the law, or that Parliament was sovereign, or even the Bill of Rights. Here is the reality. Many pieces of legislation confer benefits on a particular party or activity. That's one reason we have lobby groups. It's called democracy. For example, the World Cup empowering legislation benefited rugby supporters as well as New Zealand. Fonterra legislation backed, as I understand it, by these parties was actually argued as conferring a benefit on the farmers involved. That was the point of it. So there's nothing special about the fact that this legislation gives effect to an agreement. The Parliament has considered, for instance, treaty settlement bills for nearly 20 years. Those bills give effect to agreement made between the Crown and a non-government entity on which the Crown confers considerable benefit. Government could not function if contracts did not extend past the ending of particular governments, and government contracts almost always pass the expiry of a Parliament. They do that all the time. Government enters into long-range agreements on construction projects, a whole range of government services like IT and banking services. There have been criticism of the compensation provisions of this agreement. The compensation provisions are standard commercial practice. If Sky breaches certain agreed operating standards, they'll be required to pay money to the Crown for non-compliance. If it doesn't build the centre, it's required to pay back to the Crown the value of the concessions granted to this point. Mr Speaker, let me speak briefly on the issue of problem gambling. The impact on the incidence of problem gambling from increasing gambling opportunities within an existing gambling venue is by no means clear. This was made clear by Professor Max Abbott, well known to the Parliamentary Select Committee system for the last 25 years, and he stated this in his oral submission to the committee. The Department of Internal Affairs acknowledges that figures around problem gambling are very difficult to quantify, and putting a cost on it is, to use the words of the government officials, quote, extremely difficult. It's important to note that the agreement requires Sky City to implement a range of enhanced harm minimisation measures, including a predictive modelling tool that analyses data to better identify players at risk of problem gambling. The Greens claimed in their minority report Sky City already uses this. Like most of their claims, that's false. A voluntary pre-commitment system where players can elect to restrict the amount of time they play or the amount they spend. The agreement requires a doubling in the number of host responsibility specialists to deliver 24/7 coverage of people trained to identify problem gamblers, and the introduction of player identification requirements when amounts over $500 are being put into or cashed in non-restricted areas. These extra harm minimisation measures and anti-money laundering requirements will become part of Sky City's host responsibility program. If in the future the Gambling Commission decides to revoke or amend this program or require Auckland Casino to have tougher measures, then Sky City must comply. Mr Speaker, many things in life have the potential for harm. The government has done a good job of minimising the harm from this agreement while maximising the economic benefits to New Zealand. In that respect, no different in principle from building roads, where people will die in car accidents on roads that did not exist before. But the benefit to the community is significant. For little of any investment by taxpayers will get the benefit of an international standard convention centre, new jobs, improved competitiveness as a tourist destination, an increase in GDP and attracting more investors to New Zealand. On this side of the House, we're pleased to stand up and take practical steps to build jobs and growth for New Zealand, and pleased not to be with those parties who are simply against all jobs and growth and increases in incomes. Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable David Cunliffe.